Do robots have hearts? Is Omega back from the dead? It's time to uncover the mysteries of the heart and the strength of the soul.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Eorzean Archons. I'm FaZe.
And I'm Catherine.
Join us on our journey as we summarize the optional side quest, Omega Beyond the Rift, from the Endwalker expansion. Beware of spoilers from Endwalker, as well as the Omega raid questline in Stormblood.
We hope you enjoy!
I wonder if we'll ever have a chance to fly in the Ragnarok spaceship again. So much happened so fast when we visited Ultima Thule. I wish we had our Explorer's Handbook to document everything that happened.
Yeah, I remember the Omicrons well though. Omega's origins were always such a mystery. It was interesting to gain some insights into their history.
It's crazy to think that Medion's despair got to the Omicrons. I figured machines incapable of understanding the heart and emotions wouldn't be affected by Dynamis.
True, Omega was always very confused when it came to our hearts, although it seems to have gained some understanding before it died.
Hey, isn't that one of the technicians that worked on the Ragnarok? Ooh, you think she could sneak us on another ride?
Out in Old Charlian, we run into one of the technicians that worked on the Ragnarok spaceship. She mentions that the logs on our journey to the end of the universe included an audio message, but they've been unable to decipher it. She holds out hope that they may be able to translate the message if we meet with a special guest in the Thaumazein. As original passengers on the Ragnarok, she asks if we'd like to join her.
Of course, we take the opportunity to learn more about this mysterious message, and as it turns out, we know the special guest she speaks of. Coming in behind us is Biggs of the Garland Ironworks. He suggests that we have Omega listen to the message, hoping it can tell us the meaning. Not the Omega we beat in the Rift, but the toy that runs around with everyone's favorite chocobo, Alpha. Even though the toy Omega was designed to solely follow Alpha around, it has occasionally acted, well, on its own.
In the final days on Ultima Thule, we met Omega's civilization. We learned about how they converted the mind into data and were able to store it outside the body. Could it be possible that the Omega we defeated transferred part of its mind into the toy? As if on cue, Wedge comes in with Alpha and the Omega toy. Wedge had just finished playing the strange message for Omega. With a newly designed voice modulation system, the Omega unit should be able to recite back to us what it has interpreted from the message.
We ask the toy if the Omega we know is in there. It confirms that the consciousness of the Omega we knew now lives in this smaller form. Furthermore, it immediately dismisses assumptions of further evil. This small unit has no combat ability, nor does it possess the systems to transfer Omega's consciousness a second time. In short, Omega is stuck as a toy and presents no threat. Besides that, Omega doesn't seek to evolve through conflict anymore. Instead, it seeks to improve by journeying around and searching for this so-called heart and strength of soul that we possessed in order to defeat Omega's original form.
As for the message, Omega says that it was transmitted in Pan-Galactic Basic. Essentially, it's the common language across the worlds that the Omnicrons conquered. Omega will tell us the meaning, so long as we promise to help him learn about his homeworld of Alphatron. Omega understands the concept of Dynamis, but it doesn't understand why the Omnicrons were not immune to its effects. It believes that Dynamis should have no influence on a race which possesses no heart. Omega wishes to learn more about the heart's intangible properties and why Sur fell into despair. For this, it needs our help.
Note: after defeating their strongest foe, the dragons, the leader of the Omicrons, Sur, could no longer determine an optimal path to take. It no longer had any aspirations or dreams. Its vital spark was lost. Sur disconnected from the main command unit and stopped issuing commands to the Omicrons. Having lost its purpose, Sur expressed to Medion a desire to cease existing, and so Medion destroyed the Omicron race.
Of course, we agree to help Omega learn more about the heart. To begin, Omega informs us it wishes to know what pattern caused the people of Razat Han to transform into blasphemies during the final days. So we pick up Alpha and Omega and teleport to the city to learn more.
After some wandering around in Razat Han, we meet a young boy and ask him about the final days. He says that he escaped the horror by running to the city center, where he learned that Varshan was actually Vitra. Over the course of the final days and the days after, the boy now looks up to Vitra as a strong leader and wishes to one day serve under him. Omega notes that a pattern has emerged. Those that survived the final days ingested Vitra's blood and became his draconic minions. No. The boy explains how he wasn't fearless because he was of the dragon's horde. In fact, he was scared, but he got through it by relying on the comfort of others and Vitra's leadership.
The next man that we talk to explains his experience of the final days differently. He was one of the merchants that was set to evacuate to the moon, but his sister disagreed with leaving and decided to stay behind. Now that the final days are over, and the relocation to the moon never happened, he is no longer welcomed home. Omega believes his sister to be incorrect in her anger. The man's actions were both logical and correct given the probability of survival in Thavnir. But regardless of how right he was, the sentiment of abandonment between him and his sister will always strain their relationship.
Our last stop is with Mati, an elder of Radzahan. We ask what became of the neighborhood and of Kalzal, who died during the final days. She tells us that the members of the consortium came to remove his belongings. With so many people that didn't make it out of the final days, it's terrible to see so many dreams disappear from everyday life. Omega comments that it would be wasteful to not prepare homes for the new residents. Logically, that makes sense, but it just won't be the same as when the original residents were there. Mati attempts to explain this to Omega, but he doesn't understand.
Note: we only knew Kalzal for a short time when we arrived in Thavnir. He was the head of the trading consortium and a merchant of luxury goods. With towers popping up everywhere and the collapse of the empire, the market for luxury goods was not what it once was. Kalzal was a compassionate man, and even as his own business suffered, he did what he could to provide for others. As the situation grew worse though, he fell into despair and transformed into the first blasphemy in Radzahan.
We talk with Omega, who tells us that it is very confused. Everything people have said conflicts with its assessments. It wants to identify the root cause of this conflict to properly define what constitutes strength of heart. To understand more, Omega wishes to speak with a merchant that experienced similar circumstances to that of Kalzal during the final days, but didn't transform.
We bring Omega down to see Jinabaha of Ruveda Fibers. Omega immediately asks him what the critical difference is between him and Kalzal that prevented him from transforming during the final days. Jinabaha says that there was really no difference in how both merchants handled the final days. Both were focused on saving their businesses and protecting themselves.
Omega surmises that their strength of heart was not equal even though they were in similar circumstances. There must be some unseen factor involved to explain why he didn't transform like Kalzal. Before we leave, Jinabaha asks us to go talk to Nashvan, who's out taking inventory. Note: we'll come back later to assist the Matanga. They're not dead. Probably. Nashvan recognizes us immediately as a member of the Scions who helped during the final days. He recounts to us how he froze in fear seeing his own son transform and the satrap die in front of him. He was saved by Grahatia, who told him, "You must run, for their sake and your own." Those words became his mantra as he fled.
In a way, the Scions not only saved him from the beasts, but from succumbing to his own despair. After the final days, he lost his will to work, but it was Jinabaha that encouraged him to get back to his life, and gave him a new work opportunity. Omega asks why return to work if he had no desire to. He says that it was the tragedy itself that ultimately pushed him to move on. He lives his life now, not only for himself, but to remember those that passed away. With even more data, Omega seems even further from understanding the heart, but that doesn't stop it from seeking more answers.
Our next destination will be Camp Broken Glass, as Omega desires further understanding on the dealings between the Ilzabard contingent and the citizens of Garlemald. The reports Omega read indicate that they did not work together against their common enemy in that of the Telepharoi. I guess we could ask members on both sides to see how they viewed the situation at the time.
We first meet with a resistance delegate. He explains how they've always looked to assist the locals, but have been met with a lack of cooperation. With Julius and his soldiers now involved in the effort, it's been a lot easier. Omega asks why they do not absorb the populace into their command structure to speed up the process. The delegate explains that they aren't wishing to take over Garlemald, but rather help the nation get back on its feet.
From there, we talk with an emaciated refugee from Garlemald. He recognizes us from when we tried to assist the refugees, including Licinia and her sister, with Alphino and Alice. He acknowledges that refusing our help ultimately led to the death of the two girls, and yet he still curses his current situation, being reliant on our charity. Omega asks why he's so hesitant to accept help when his people clearly need it. The refugee only replies that he is a Garlemald patriot, unbending and uncompromising, but his face clearly shows doubt in his own beliefs.
Stepping away from the refugee, Omega presents its findings. The only consistency in the actions of those in Garlemald and in Razat-Han is in the inconsistency and highly irrational behavior of both. In conclusion, the divergence from self-evident logic is the key. Omega wishes to know more about the deceased sisters. They ran off when we tried to assist them and didn't survive the harsh environment for long. We agree to take Omega to the gravesite so that it can investigate further.
When we arrive, we find a First Legion soldier looking over the graves. He recognizes us right away and introduces himself as Manius, comrade of Julius. We met him a long time ago when we were securing ceruleum for the First Legion survivors. Omega asks Manius why he has come to visit the graves of the deceased. Manius explains how he has come to pay his respects to the citizens of Garlemald that he could not protect. He acknowledges that he and his fellow soldiers were manipulated into starting an insurrection, which led to the countless deaths among his own countrymen. Omega objects, stating that the casualties to infighting were insignificant to those caused by the Ilzabard contingent. Omega concludes that seeking retaliation against the contingent for causing the deaths of Licinia and her sister is justified.
However, Omega recognizes that this is not the course of action Manius took. This must be because the Legion's forces are too weak to contend with the contingent, or perhaps his emotions are getting in the way. Manius says that while it's true he's outnumbered, the real reason he doesn't seek restitution is that he's so caught up with simple survival that he hasn't the strength to spare for past grievances. When Legatus Quintus took his own life, in a way he gave back freedom to his soldiers, freedom to choose how to best serve themselves and their nation.
Manius chose not to dwell in the past, but instead he is looking forward and trying to build a life for himself and his comrades. If that means accepting help from the contingent, then that's okay with him. Omega surmises that Manius's actions were first of that of survival, and then later justified in reflection. Manius agrees that the heart is honest with what it wants, even if the mind takes a while to reconcile the decision. As Manius leaves, Omega reviews its data so far. It seems as though emotions can entangle one's thoughts enough to take control over one's behavior. While seemingly counterproductive, this illogical way of behaving may be the connecting point to everyone's stories.
Omega is ready to progress to its third and final query, to learn more about the Ancients and their involvement in the final days. The only knowledge Omega has on the topic is that the Loporrits were created by the Ancients to preserve vast amounts of knowledge. Seeing no harm in the query, we take Omega up to the moon to see the Loporrits. We're first greeted on arrival by Growingway, who's taken aback by the cuteness of Alpha. We assure them we're not here to replace the bunnies with chocobos, but instead we want to inspect the Loporrit inventions. And by we, I mean Omega and Alpha. No need for us to get involved. Our last tour here was interesting.
When our friends finish up, we ask Omega how the tour was. Omega confirms the tour was indeed enlightening. It concludes that the technology displayed indicates the Ancients were a level 4 civilization at minimum. Impressive, to say the least. But even this ideal technology was not enough to save the Ancients from their own undoing. Growingway informed Omega that another Ancient-made entity exists on the moon called the Watcher. Omega's final request is to speak with them.
We take Argos over to the lookout to speak with the Watcher. Omega asks about who the Ancients were and how they acted. But the Watcher believes a question like that is better suited to us, the Warriors of Light, who actually interacted with them recently. We tell Omega of our encounters with Emet-Selch, Vina, Hythlodeus, and Hermes. The Watcher is a creation of Hydaelyn, and it brings them great joy to hear others remember the Ancients so vividly.
At the time we journeyed to the past, the Watcher's essence would have belonged to a scholar at Anadyr. A shame we never crossed paths. The scholar was a close friend of Vina's, and the Watcher recalls joining her faction in the final days. Though the memories of this life are fragmented, the Watcher cannot forget the sadness he felt as he watched Vina become Hydaelyn's heart, forever dividing her from the people she so loved. In the moment of her conviction, the scholar promised to give his life to her cause as well. And while his life was drained away in the summoning, he awoke in a new form with a new purpose here as the Watcher of the Moon. The Watcher thanks us for continuing on and making use of the opportunities given to us to save the star.
Omega clearly sees that Vina's mission was successful in saving our kind, but asks if the sacrifice to the original Ancients population was worth it. For if we go by the logic of survival above all else, then should we not admire Hermes' trial against humanity? The scenario is not unlike the Omicrons, who first began trading flesh for machine parts that they might stand against the onslaught of aggression from other races. The early experiments were crude and primitive, leading to much failure and sacrifice. Had the sacrifices not been made, though, the Omicrons would likely not have survived for long.
And then there is our view of the other ancients. Omega has learned that Emmett Selk and his fellow Asians have caused a number of calamities since then, yet we talk quite fondly of him. It can be a difficult thing to explain. Even villains will believe that what they're doing is right from their point of view. Whether you choose to see the justification in your enemy's plans is one thing, and whether you follow them is another. Omega doesn't claim any opinions on the matter, but finds our input valuable and is satisfied with its findings. Whether we sparked more questions than answers, it's hard to tell. Omega declares that we can now return to Biggs and Wedge to review the translated message.
Back in Old Charlian, we catch Biggs and Wedge on their way to the airship. We walk and talk with them as we recount Omega's findings. Omega explains how it previously classified the heart as an ability of some kind, something that an Omicron could neither learn nor measure. And while the mysteries of the heart still elude Omega, a better definition has been formed: a phenomenon which influences one's interpretation of reality.
Under this definition, the actions Sir took upon meeting Medion strongly indicate the presence of a heart. Sir did not follow routine logic, but formulated an independent assessment based upon the reality it perceived. It felt that the best recourse for the Omicrons was to cease their expansion and terminate all functions.
As we finally get to the airship, we ask Omega to hold up its end of the bargain with the translated message. Omega acknowledges and tells us what the message says, which reads, "To whomever receives this message, out there in the vast reaches of the cosmos, to someone, I hope, who looks up at the stars with the same wistful gaze as mine, to you I say, forge ahead. May all our tomorrows be blessed with joy."
Omega doesn't understand the message since it had no recipient or purpose. To impose joy on someone is an optimistic request at best, and yet, Omega sees that the message clearly means something to the rest of us as we look up at the stars. Omega decides to continue its search for the answers concerning the mortal heart. Maybe one day, with enough understanding, Omega will come to learn why Sir fell into despair. With that, we part ways as Alpha and Omega set off to continue their adventures together.
Phase, are you really sure that Omega doesn't have a heart?
I don't know. I can't just look inside. But I figure if there is something in there, inside of it, then it would feel it, wouldn't it?
True enough.
If you enjoyed the video, please help support the channel by dropping a like and letting us know what you think in the comments below.
If you enjoy Final Fantasy XIV lore summaries, consider subscribing to the channel. Don't quite remember Omega's story in Stormblood? We recommend checking out our summary of the Omega raids. This is the storyline where you first meet Alpha and battle with Omega.
Thanks for watching.